I would like to welcome all of you to our first webinar series of year 2022, wherein we'll be highlighting the key risk of WEF World Economic Forum report of year 2022. And this is a very interesting topic which we will be covering today. My name is Saurabh Dubey. I am the chairperson for UAE IRM regional group, and I, along with my colleague Ashish and Tamer, will be taking you through this particular interesting topic. So as part of the today's webinar, we will be covering the key risks from global risk perception point of view, what are the real present danger situations we have, and what are the increase in the risk levels in start of COVID-19 situation. Along with that, we'll be also touching upon the key risk from Middle East perspective and how it is aligned or not in line with that from rest of the world perspective. We'll be presenting to you some of the comparison from the risk perspective. And last but not the least, we'll be also talking about some of the risk mitigation effort that is being practiced by the leading risk management team across the world. So with that note, I would invite the presenter, my fellow group member from UAE RG, Tamer, and my colleague Ashish for walking you through this presentation. At any point of time, if you have any query, please feel free to drop your query at chat box. We'll be answering all the queries at the end of this presentation. Thank you. So Tamer, over to you.
Thank you very much, and hello everyone, and I hope that you're having a beautiful Monday. And thank you very much for attending the session today. Very quickly, I'll just take you over the risks that have been identified by the World Economic Forum. Ashish, can you switch the slide? Thank you. So every year for the past 17 years, the World Economic Forum has been conducting surveys from CEOs and other leaders within organizations, as well as country leaders and other experts working with universities such as Oxford University or other powerhouses or strategic partners to conduct these studies and surveys, and then collating all of that data together. This year is the 17th edition of this report. And at the same time, the top risks that have been identified are not, I would say, a big surprise for us. One of the main surprises is that, one of the main risks is effectively the planet. And as you can see, we are seeing some severe and extreme weather happening across the different parts of the world. Sometimes that could mean volcano eruptions. It also could mean severe winds or tornadoes, an increase in those, or high temperatures or very low temperatures, so very cold winters or very hot summers. Now, we've all heard about the degrees in Celsius of what is the limit, and currently it stands at 2 degrees Celsius. However, now the report is actually showing 1.8 degrees Celsius, and that this is the most optimistic scenario. However, I wanted to also share with you that this morning a new report effectively came out, and from a new report actually showing that the window for making actually positive changes to counter climate change is narrowing down, and it's becoming more and more difficult to actually make changes impactful for the planet. Now, what does this mean? It also means a change in the it means changes in the environment, in the bioenvironment. There is also a loss of species that could actually happen, and we all and if you're not aware, I am not a biologist, so I'm not going to speak about that in further detail, but when you lose a specific species within the environment, it does have a cascading effect, because that species is there for a reason, and then it will disrupt the cycle of life in that environment, and then that could actually cause further deterioration and impact on the population around that environment as well. So it's not just a number of 1.8 degrees Celsius. It's not just a number of amount of money that you could see on the screen, $130 trillion that were committed to counter or to work on climate change. It is also just a matter that it goes beyond that, because it has also effects on the environments that we live in terms of the animals and the planets that could actually be wiped out because of that. And if you look at the news, I don't need to say that on a regular basis, but every once in a while you will hear that there is a new animal or new planet that has been endangered or has been wiped out from existence. And you could attribute it partly or maybe fully to the climate change. Now, another risk factor that is there and is the reliance, I would say, on being online. And this is even becoming more severe with the introduction of the metaverse and the discussions that are happening right now around the metaverse and how the implications of it and the usages of it will happen. However, despite the fact that we're hearing about the metaverse, we still have 3 billion people are offline. And that represents effectively 37% of the world's population. Now you will say, okay, well, that's not a bad number. However, do note that out of the rest that are online, not all of them have high-speed connections. There are still people who have slow internet speed connections that is affecting their connectivity. Yet, unfortunately, spyware, ransomware, hacking attempts, identity theft are on the rise. And as you could see, as a one example, 435% increase in ransomware. And this is now the number one, or maybe the number two risk for companies overall. Because once you have a ransomware hit your infrastructure, that's it. Your entire infrastructure could actually be locked out and you won't be able to do any work. And despite all of that, and I can say this from the line of work that I work in, which is consulting in the MENA region, when we go and speak with our clients, you would be surprised how they rate cybersecurity or their readiness for cybersecurity as being very high, when in fact it's actually pretty low. And this is something that we're going to only see increases of it, because the most sophisticated elements of systems can always be hacked, and sometimes the hacker is an unintentional user of the system who writes their passwords on a piece of paper and leaves it on the desk. So that is another chapter by itself, which is called social hacking. So those are the two top risks that have been identified by your peers across the globe. Ashish, can we go to the second slide? And then, of course, the thing that we have lived through for the past 2 years and continue to live with, although I think now we're seeing a little bit of lifting of elements of restrictions and regulations around travel and around entering shops and malls and gathering into large numbers. But still, COVID has created a massive gap in societies. I don't need to tell you that, okay, vaccinations, the responses of COVID across the various governments, it has been diverse. We've seen some countries that were acted strongly, and there were protests and all of that, and then others that were acted poorly, and that has also effect on their population. COVID has financial impacts, it has social impacts, and it also had personal impacts on mental health for a lot and millions of individuals that will still be available, I would say, to deal with and to recover from for years to come. The social impacts, whether it was due to voluntary job loss or involuntary job loss, it has helped in effectively creating a wealth gap, or further expanding actually the wealth gap that was already existent over there. And that doesn't really help the social structure where 52 sorry, where you see that the poorest countries are unfortunately unable to obtain the vaccine, while the richest countries are trying to sell it sometimes, or being selective in how they're distributing it, and sometimes, as we've seen a lot in the news early on in the days, that they were throwing the vaccine away because it expired. So the effects of COVID are not something that is going to be gone once they lift all of the travel restrictions and we stop wearing masks. The effects of COVID are still going to be seen for the next 2 to 3 years, if not even longer, on our environments, in our cultures, in our society, and in the companies that we work in, and with our friends as well. Yes, we are getting back into more social events. However, the wealth gap itself it has created has affected. One statistic that is not available on this slide is that the developing countries or the developing economies are actually going to be missing their GDP growth projections by 5.5%. However, that's excluding China. However, the developed economies are going to exceed their GDP growth projections by 0.9%. So as you could see, the developing economies are still going to be suffering with a bigger gap in the wealth between them and the developing nations, and that is just going to create an imbalance that for the next decade or so, we're still going to see the effects of it going forward. And I think I maybe merged the two risks together between the scars of COVID and the looming economic and debt crisis, but a little bit further on the debt crisis. More countries are now borrowing money. A lot of more companies borrowed money, and individuals borrowed money in the past 2 years than their predecessing years, and that is causing effectively a bigger problem along the way, because that is also affecting the generation of wealth in the various economies and the way and the various countries, and even in the companies, how they're going to be repaying that and putting themselves under significant stress. And as you could see, this is also creating significant inflation. So just look at the prices of food, look at the prices of gasoline. I just got the notification that prices are going to go up this month for gasoline, so it's actually pretty intense. Needless to say, one of the other impacts of the debt crisis is the reduction of foreign direct investment that is going to be happening in the developing nations, coming from the developed nations. And that is by far one of the most significant factors that will continue and increase the wealth gap between the developed and the developing nations, and deepening the social impact that this will cause. So those are the 4 top risks that have been identified, and you could find more detail about them in the WEF report. I'm happy to answer any questions, whether now or at a later stage. Ashish?
Thanks. Thank you, Ramesh. Tamer. No, I just I'm looking at quickly on the question, so we don't have anything till now. Thank you for your summary description, and let me take it forward from there. I hope I am audible. If not, please do let the fellow panelists know. So apart from the four risks that Tame talked about, one interesting risk that has been highlighted in this year's report by World Economic Forum is also geoeconomic confrontations. It is very, you can say, I think it is only a coincidence that this particular risk was not part of the global risk report last year. In fact, it was newly introduced in this year's report, and unfortunately, the risk has been materialized with the recent invasion in Ukraine, and which may have adverse impact on global GDP and inflation. So the risk, in summary, is related to how protectionist policies, especially because of the COVID-19 impact, the kind of impact it had on global economies. A lot of nationalist policies and agendas have been put in place by different countries, and which has led to increase in, you can say, areas where geoeconomic confrontations are increasing. As you can say, it also has a direct impact on the GDP growth rate, and as such, there is a negative percentage change forecast for GDPs of all the global superpowers, so including Russia, Eurozone, but it will not leave UK, US, and rest of the world also intact. So there are going to be spillover effects on the GDPs of all major countries of the world because of this new risk that has come in place in this particular year. Moving forward, I would like to talk about a kind of trend analysis that has been captured in this year's report, which talks about how some of the risks which have been perceived, which have been making part of WEF's risk report over the years, have increased in their risk severity or perceived risk severity, we should say. So overall, these are divided into five main areas, which are environment, social, technological, geopolitical, and economical. Some of the most of these risks are have been continuously coming up on an year-on-year basis. But what we have seen is these particular risks have seen an increase in their risk severity in this particular year. So we'll start with the first one, which is climate action failure. The environment risks which are related to climate action failure, extreme weather, and biodiversity loss. So as Tamer already mentioned, climate action failure and extreme weather, these risks are being perceived more critically by the leaders and the organizations which participated in this particular survey this year. And overall, we can see that around 19% higher severity has been associated with these particular risks. So with respect to the percentage of correspondents who responded with the let's say climate action failure to be an important risk which can materialize in short to medium term, sorry, has increased. So more number of respondents now believe that climate action failure is a risk which can severely hamper the global outlook, you can say. So climate action failure, extreme weather, and biodiversity loss are some of the risks which have seen an increase in their severity from the past years. From social risk perspective, social cohesion erosion has seen the most dramatic increase in terms of its severity. In fact, I think it is the most uh, uh, escalated risk from the last year. And one of the main reason why we have seen such a drastic severity increase in its severity is because of COVID-19. As we have witnessed in initial slides which Tamir presented, COVID-19 has basically increased the divide between developed and developing, or even the poorest countries across the world, which has led to more than 50 million of additional population living in extreme poverty. All of these reasons directly attribute to erosion in social cohesion. So even not inter-country but intra-country division is also increasing. That means within the social fabric of a society, we can see there is a greater divide now because of COVID-19, and people have become more susceptible to question their governments and question the society as a whole on how they are being taken care of, especially the marginalized uh, portion of any particular society. Up, linking to this is also livelihood crisis. So of course the social fabric is also maintained when people have good livelihood. They are able to take care of themselves, their family and their loved ones, which also has seen an increase in severity. So many people had to leave their jobs, either voluntary or involuntary, for multiple reasons, and this has also led to increase in their mental health deterioration as well. So the third direct impact, because of the recent changes or the recent uh, factors of COVID-19 which the world had to face, even mental health deterioration has also increased quite highly compared to previous years. Moving to the next risk area, which has seen slight increase comparative to last year, is technological, which in relation to cybersecurity mainly. So cybersecurity failures is one of the risks which has seen slight increase in terms of its risk severity, especially because of the multitude or the multiple number of ransomware and malware attacks that have increased sharply to 300 to 400% over the past year. Coming to digital inequality again, because of so digital inequality is kind of an outcome of social inequality, as we see between as the gap widens between developed and developing economies. In the similar fashion, the digital inequality is also increasing. So many developing countries or poor countries do not have equal access to critical digital networks and technology, which has a direct which because of direct result of unequal investment. So as we also saw that there is a decrease uh, in FDI investment, foreign direct investment, in developing and poor countries. This also leads to another enablement of digital inequality across the world. And finally, the last key risk in technological area is adverse tech advances. So this risk has slightly increased its severity in terms of the impact of technology and how any advances in technology can have adverse impact on humans. So whether it is related to artificial intelligence, have we done our cost benefit analysis related to any kind of technological advances? Do we know what kind of negative outcomes are associated with such technological advances? So these kind of questions are also now being raised and being asked with slightly more conviction than in the past. The next area is related to geopolitical risk, in which the first is related to geo-economic confrontation. As I said, this risk itself is pretty new. So overall, it is incorporated, but the summation of 7% that you see over here is an average of three risks together. So the other two being interstate relation fracture and geopolitical resource contestation. All of these risks point towards more nationalistic policies being put in place by multiple countries to protect their interest compared to the global interest. So what we can say is the upward trend that globalization was looking in the past couple of decades may have taken a small hit due to the COVID-19 situation, where nationalization has become a more of an important issue for some of the countries across the globe. Then the last area is related to economics, and the main areas, as already Tamer has mentioned, have seen increased risk severity compared to previous years. Debt crisis, which again has a direct relation to COVID-19 impact. Many countries were not able to fulfill the demands of or to make sure that they are able to provide for their countries, their citizens, which made them take additional debts. There were many businesses which were going under because of COVID-19 and because of stall in investment. So they also took additional debt to keep them afloat. All of these things have led to increase in debt crisis globally. Asset bubble burst is an interesting risk which has seen slight risk severity increase. This is related to uh, a perception that the economies of some countries are not growing vis-a-vis the growth in the asset valuation of some of these countries. So there is a kind of you can say mismatch or a disconnect between the real economy and the perceived economy of a country. This has also seen slight increase in the recent year. And the last one is prolonged stagnation in economy. So the reason for this particular risk to have slight increase in its severity is COVID-19. Because of COVID-19, there was a sharp decline in some of the GDPs of certain countries, but the acceleration of those economies, or the way they would be able to capture back the portion of GDP that they lost in the past couple of years, is not at the same level. So acceleration is slow, and there is a perceived risk that it will take longer time to come up to the same level of economic GDP standardization compared to the fall that took place in the previous years. Moving on, we will now delve into how Middle East nations have perceived some of these risks. So, apart from the Global Risk Perception Survey, there was an executive opinion survey that was conducted by World Economic Forum across 124 nations to identify risk for coming 2 years. And on this particular slide, what we will see is from the global risks. There were 37 global risks identified by World Economic Forum as part of this report, out of which are the risks which were highlighted the most by the Middle Eastern nations. So we'll start with the first one, and there is a few clubbing in some of the risks that we have done over here. So the first risk is more related to economical, and we have asset bubble burst, debt crisis in large economy, and prolonged economy stagnation as some of the risks which are highlighted by the Middle East countries, which includes Kuwait, Israel, UAE, Bahrain, Jordan, Lebanon, and Iran. Just to give you a slight breakdown over here, asset bubble burst and debt crisis were mostly highlighted by countries of Kuwait, Israel, and UAE, while prolonged economy stagnation were highlighted more by Jordan, Lebanon, and Iran. So overall, these are the countries that highlighted this particular economical risk. Then the next particular risk is related to human-made environmental damages and climate action failures. So again, this is an environment risk which has reverberated across Middle East nations as well. And Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Qatar, and UAE have the executives from these countries have highlighted this as a particular risk in their surveys as well. The third risk is related to infectious diseases. So it is a direct outcome of COVID-19. Countries such as Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, and KSA do believe that infectious risk is here to stay, or at least in the short and medium term, this risk is still very important for the economy of these countries. The next particular risk is related to digital inequality and failure of cybersecurity measures. So digital inequality was highlighted by Qatar as one of the key risks, while failure of cybersecurity measures was highlighted by Bahrain, Israel, and UAE as one of the risks. So in the recent past, what we have witnessed is there have been some certain cyber attacks uh, in UAE and in other Middle East countries. So that is one of the reasons why this risk has uh, has been witnessed by the executives. While digital inequality is something that is more towards developing and developed nations divide, so only Qatar has highlighted this one. The next risk is related to interstate conflict and fracture of interstate relations. again quite closely related to geopolitical or geoeconomical confrontations. And in this particular area, KSA, Israel, Qatar, and Yemen, executives from these areas have highlighted that this risk remains very strongly for their countries. The next risk highlighted by the Middle East executives are employment and livelihood crisis risk, which is mostly highlighted by Iran, Jordan, and Bahrain. The main reason being the recent societal changes or turnarounds that has been witnessed across these three countries. And the last risk is related to state collapse, again societal risk highlighted by Lebanon and Yemen. It is very interesting to see over here that some of these although risks such as number 2, which is climate action failure, or number 4, which is cyber security, are common and are globally perceived as well, but there are a few risks which are highlighted here which are not highlighted with the same level of severity globally. So for example, risk of infectious diseases or state collapse is not one of the most priority risk of rest of the world as compared to the Middle Eastern nations. We also have developed and prepared an analysis of some of the key risks for the rest of the world which are not highlighted as critical for the Middle Eastern nations based on the survey report. And the following are the 6 such risks. The first one is related to extreme weather events, which has been highlighted by multiple countries across the world, but it has not been perceived as such for Middle Eastern countries. So extreme weather events has not been given that much weightage compared to climate action or failure of climate action. So they believe that climate action failure in the future or in the 5 to 10 years horizon will become very important, but probably not at this stage. The second risk is related to erosion of social cohesion. Again, this is more related to the social fabric of the country. So it is intra-country risk, and it has not been highlighted by Middle Eastern nation. The third risk is related to digital power concentration, which has been highlighted by a few developed countries, but not the Middle Eastern nations. The next risk is related to large scale involuntary migration. Again, uh, because of uh, because of multiple reasons, whether it is COVID-19, whether it is some wars that have happened, whether it is job losses that have happened across the world, there have been a lot of involuntary migration across various countries. Various countries have witnessed that. But overall, the Middle Eastern nations perceive that they are still pretty much risk free. No, I would not say risk free, but it is not of one of their major concerns compared to the rest of the world. The next particular risk is related to severe commodity shock. So as such, we have witnessed that the commodity shock has also been actualized right now with the rising fuel and gold prices across the world, but it has not been perceived as such across the Middle Eastern nation, mainly because we can consider most of the Middle East nations are more of exporters rather than importers of commodities, which put them in a better situation compared to rest of the world. And the last risk is related to failure of public infrastructure. This has also been highlighted by multiple countries which are not uh, in the Middle East. So Middle East nations have not highlighted as one of their key global risks. Moving forward, we have also tried to do a slight comparison of these prominent
Sorry,
risks.
Ashish. There have been some questions, and I think maybe it's time to answer them.
Okay, I'll take a pause, Tamir. Maybe if you can read through the question and then we can
Sure.
discuss those.
So this is from Nicholas Turin. Any comments on the disruption of the supply chains, especially in the Middle East? Okay, so can we, let me see over here and see if I can
So if I may add over here, Amir, thank you, Nicholas, for your question. Yes, supply chain disruption has been highlighted as an important risk, but it has, from the commentary that World Economic Forum have provided, they have put that risk under the COVID-19 hindsight and future outlook area. So yes, there is a risk of supply chain imbalances, and but it is one of the, you can say, one of the contributing factor, or one of the uh, one of the causes which has come out of the COVID-19 COVID-19 risk that has come. So
Ashish,
so
just wanted to add here that another classic example for supply chain disruption is the frequent attacks on the oil tankers in the Gulf region. So in June 2019, May 2019, there are instances wherein oil tankers have been attacked again and again by the various activities. In that sense, what happens that there is a threat of losing potential fleet which is being laid for the supply of oil and gas related activity. So in this region, these are the risks have been always dominating from supply chain disruption point of view. What do you, Ashish?
If I can add to this, hi, it's Nicholas. It's the idea also what happened in the canal not that long ago with all the tankers that got lined up. And actually the supply chain disruption in the Middle East was there before COVID. It's been exacerbated by COVID, but it still hasn't, we can't blame it on it. I would say that it's one of these things that roared its ugly head during COVID, and now we kind of have to face it more. I mean, especially for me in the healthcare field, you talked about the vaccines and like getting them not just to the Middle East, but distributing from here. Medical supplies is tech equipment. We see the issue that they're having right now, even for building some of the computer parts in some of the resource-rich countries. Lumber has been impacted, even in Canada, for example, where lumber availability and prices have skyrocketed, and that's going to impact us as importers of all of these things that we can't grow or build here.
thank you, Nicholas. No, I completely agree, and I think it also, we can also say that there is some impact in terms of it all depends upon how you categorize some of the requirements from supply chain perspective. Like, are these critical commodities? Then in a way, indirectly, this risk is also captured under severe commodity shocks. So where there can be a very like, as you said, like in terms of technology, the shortage of microprocessing chips and all has a direct impact on our demand for processing new hardwares and softwares. So totally agree to your point. Important commodities and the restrictions, or the inability to get those at the right time and at the right price has become an important area for the world.
Okay.
Do we have more?
Yeah, let's take two more questions and then we can answer the rest at a later time. This is from Sachin Kumar. Can you explain what is assets bubble burst?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, Sachin, so basically there are prices for different, like housing or investment funds and shares in your economy, which are priced based on, and there is always a growth or a decrease in the pricing of such assets, the country's assets, which are commercial, you can say, in nature. Okay, and they generally go hand in hand with the way economy is progressing, the way your GDP is growing, right? So what we are saying is that there has been asset bubbles created in certain countries where the valuation of such assets is quite higher compared to the way the economy is growing. So there is a bubble that has been created, and it is only time when there can be a severe crash in the asset valuation of such, in the valuation of such assets going forward, because the economies are not growing at the same level with which the valuation is growing for these particular assets. So there is a disconnect between the real economy and the perceived economy. currently for certain economies. I hope it was clear.
Okay, and this one is from Numan Sohail. Is the executive opinion survey by WEF part of the global risk reports? Numan, no, it's not. It's a separate survey and it has its own separate report. However, it is an input into the global risk report, because what they do in the global risk report, they conduct it with company leaders, with other think tanks, and with a lot of other, and they invite a lot of other people to it. However, the executive opinion, they actually go to world leaders, to country leaders, effectively. Now, in that report, they go into more detail about which country leaders did they go to, but it's a high number. It's around 12,000 people. But they use that to provide also insights and also information more about what is the projection and how optimistic they are towards the risk. So if you go into page maybe like 10 or 11, you would see that they're starting to talk more about, or a little bit later in the report, you will start to see the perceptions and how the outlook for risk they're seeing. Is it optimistic or are they concerned or whatnot? That is coming from the executive opinion survey. Okay, mindful of time, let's just move on, Ashish, and we'll try to answer the other questions later on.
Sure, Damir. I think I have a couple of more slides to run through. So as I was saying, we also did an overall comparison of how risks were perceived by Middle Eastern executives compared to the global executives. And we identified that more or less societal risk, technological risk, and economical risk did not show a major variation. So the percentage of respondents that responded to that concurred to specific societal, technological, or economical risk remained same. However, we saw a slight difference when it comes to perception towards environmental risk and geopolitical risk. Talking about environmental risk, what we witnessed was overall Middle Eastern nations or the executives perceived environmental risk 3% lesser than the rest of the world. And on the other hand, geopolitical risk was perceived by Middle Eastern nations by 4% higher compared to the rest of the world. So these are some of the on the right hand side, what you can see is like extreme weather events, biodiversity loss, and ecosystem collapse. These type of risks were not really perceived as critical risk for Middle East nations, except for Iran. While risks such as rivalry between powers or basically societal geo-economic confrontations, these were perceived higher by countries such as Saudi Arabia and Iran compared to the rest of the world. So these are the main two differences that we have seen in terms of risk perception between Middle East and the rest of the world. Moving on to the last slide. So we've only talked about risk till now, and this slide slightly talks about the risk mitigation efforts and the kind of perception that the leaders of this particular survey have in terms of controls which are, or the efforts which are being put in place to mitigate some of the risks. So we'll start from technological point of view. Some of the risks related to cross-border cyber attacks or artificial intelligence, which is nothing but adverse advances in technology or space exploration. These overall the opinion is that 80% of the respondents believe that any kind of controls or mitigation efforts related to these particular risks has not yet started, or we are in very early stage of development. Only 20% of the respondents believe that there have been some effective controls in place related to these areas or established controls in place. The next area is related to environment, in which climate change mitigation, natural disaster relief, and biodiversity preservation were captured as risk. and it was noted that overall 65% of the respondents still believe that the real risk mitigation has not yet started, or it is in early development stage. Only 35% do believe that there is some effective or established controls in place to mitigate these risks. Moving to societal risk, basic resources security, poverty elevation, human health crisis, or migration and refugees, the key societal risk that we have talked about, there is a direct split between not started early development and effective or established. The reason for this, the stark 50-50% split that you can see, is simply because of the way this risk is being perceived by respondents from developed nations compared to developing or the poorest nations of the world. So there is a big, as we said, there is a big divide, and that is also clearly shown in the percentage, the way people have responded to this particular risk. The next area is related to geopolitical risk, which are related to physical conflict resolution or international crime. These are some of the risk mitigation efforts which are more or less effectively established right now. And only few respondents believe that there is still scope for improvement in these areas. Similarly, for economical risk, financial system stability or trade facilitation, a large portion of the respondents believe that we have sufficient risk, we have put in sufficient risk mitigation efforts which can help us in dealing with such financial crisis scenarios, and only 29% of the population do believe that there is still some improvement required in these areas. With that, I think we have covered all the key aspects of the Global Risk Perception Survey and the Global Risk Report as published by World Economic Forum. And we would be happy to take any further questions that we have in the time that is being permitted to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ashish. There is one question from Muhammad Rashid. Interstate conflict witnessed in UAE with the recent incidents that occurred. So I'm not sure sorry, but Muhammad, what do you mean by the question?
Maybe if you can explain which conflict we are talking about. Was it a recent drone strike that happened here in UAE?
Ashish Damer, he is on mute. He can only write actually.
These are all self-muted. Yeah, they can unmute themselves. Tamir,
Okay,
can you tell me?
You're unmuted now. You could, if you could clarify your question, please. Muhammad, you're unmuted.
Oh yes. Sorry, I didn't see that. Yes, it is related to the recent drone attacks that had happened. But what I was looking at the presentation that was made, the one particular slide which mentioned that the interstate relations, the interstate conflict and fracture of interstate relationships. There was no mention that there was anything related to UAE where the attacks actually happened. It was showing mostly about Saudi Arabia, Israel, Qatar, and Yemen. So my point was, with the survey, wasn't that supposed to be included there, or is it like it's still being considered as not a point of risk for the UAE?
Well, I can say for surety, Mohammed. Thank you for pointing the question out. So, of course, at the time when the report came out, the data that was collated and the perception of you can say respondents from UAE till that time was that interstate relation may not have been an important area of concern for them. So of course, maybe in the next report when it comes out, it can become as one of the area which could be highlighted by the executives with whom WEF contacted for their opinions. So what we are highlighting over here is the responses.
As well, if I may add,
Yes, Tam. Tamer, you wanted to say something? We cannot hear you.
Terrorism or attacks or military attacks or whatnot. Hello?
I think the presentation had a 6 o'clock drop date, and it dropped on it. It basically dropped at 6 p.m. straight.
Oh, so it's already dropped, is it?
Yes, okay. So, yeah, okay. And I'm getting messages that there is dead air.
All right. So, Rory, can you respond to them that we will be collating all these questions and will be providing response to them over or some other platform? Or can we still type the answers in?
Sorry, Ashish. Omar, can you still hear us?
Yes, I can hear you, Tamir.
Okay, no, because I thought that the others. So to answer the
No, Tamir, others can't hear. Oh, sorry, others can hear. Okay, perfect.
yeah, so regarding the violence or terrorist attacks, we effectively that's always a risk, and that's never been removed from any risk list that was ever created. However, the likelihood of it is the determining factor. Now, when we want to look at, for instance, the situation in the UAE in particular, those attacks were, I would say, infrequent, low in number, and although they were near populated areas, they were also stopped from causing further and more significant damage than intended. So is it still a risk? Of course it is, but the likelihood and the advancements in the military capabilities of the UAE, I would say the likelihood of impact is going to be lower than, for instance, if these drones were used on other nations. It's a tricky subject, and there is a lot of subjectivity to it, and it really depends on how you assess the situation that it determines the aspect of it. Okay, I realize that we're out of time. There is a question for Richard Cross and Norman Sohail that we are more than happy to respond via email to everybody. Okay, and I think there is one from Girish Menon around the project risks investment. So thank you very much I mean, Saurabh, are you okay with us responding back to everybody via email, or would you like to address those, and if you can allow us a few more minutes to address?
Absolutely, Tamir. In the interest of the time, all the questions we have taken note and we'll be responding to them over the email letter.
Okay, perfect.
So thank you everyone for joining us, and we will be keep organizing such webinar, and we'll be also planning to conduct a short survey very soon, where we will be taking your interest, like which are the different areas you would like to be engaged in future. So we'll be coming up with new survey as well from our side, so that we will be more organized in organizing our future event. Thank you so much and have a great week ahead. Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for attending.